Hi, I'm Jenkins, the family law vlogger, and today on the vlog, I'm delighted to be joined by 4 experts in the field of children and separating families, and we're going to talk about a book that has been published recently during the period of the global pandemic, and the book is called Living Together, Separating, Divorcing, Surviving During a Pandemic. Now, I'll give you a bit of background about the book and then I'll introduce our 4 kind of contributors who I'm delighted have joined us today just to understand a bit more about this book and how it can help. So I understand this book was a project that came about from a chap called Michael Lang, who's a mediator in Florida, and Peter Nicholson, who's an advertising and marketing expert in Dublin. And they've collaborated on projects in the past, and they contacted a series of mediators and other professionals who work with families from all across the globe. So this is not just about families in the UK. And they asked these mediators and other experts whether they would contribute to a fast turnaround project so they could get a book published quickly during the period of the pandemic to offer some advice and support to families who were going through various different experiences arising out of the circumstances that the pandemic presented. Now, the book's been published, and the details of the book, the full title, how you can access it, will be in the notes underneath this blog. And the book has 70 contributors from 10 different countries, and it was published within a month. So it really was a mammoth effort and a really fascinating read, and lots of different thoughts and views shared. So today I'm joined by 4 of the contributors. So first of all, I'm just going to introduce you all, ladies. Thank you for joining me. So our first contributor is Sue Atkins. Sue is a parenting author and broadcaster. She's widely published. Most recently, have a look at her Divorce Journal for Children, which is available, so do have a good look at that. And she's widely published, and you will have seen Sue on TV as well. So thank you very much and welcome, Sue. We then also have Jane Cooksey. Delighted to see Jane. Jane is a professional mediator and conflict coach with Berkeley Square Mediation, and she's also a former lawyer and psychologist. So it's great to have Jane's views. Then we have Louisa Whitney. Hi, Louisa. Louisa is an accredited family mediator, doing mediations online and offline, and she's also a PPC and trainer with LKW Family Mediation. And then last but not least, we have my partner at Mills & Reeve, Alison Bull. Alison's a partner, hi. Alison's a partner in the family and children team at Mills & Reeve, and she's a family mediator and also undertakes mediations involving discussions with children. So thank you very much, ladies, all of you. Lovely to see you and to understand a bit more about this book. So first of all, I'm going to come to Sue, I think, first. Sue, what did you decide to write about in your chapter in this book, and who do you think would be particularly interested in that chapter?
Well, I wrote helping children feel nurtured, supported and heard through divorce, separation or breakup, because it's the children that we worry about a lot. We put them at the centre of that process as well. We worry about them short-term, medium-term and long-term. So that's where I specialise, in helping families through divorce and making that sort of process a little bit easier on the children, as well as helping the families as a whole.
So who would be interested in it, Sue? Do you think that parents, but also wider family members who are thinking out for children in that sort of circumstance?
Possibly, but predominantly my work is with parents and families, usually the mum as well, in particular supporting them through the challenges of change. I talk about there being sort of 7 stages that everyone goes through, based on the Kubler-Ross sort of bereavement and dying kind of model, but actually when you go through divorce it's somewhat similar to that, or a separation or a breakup. But I talk about that the next phase is that you turn the corner and eventually you rise again. And what people don't actually realise is that any major life change, whether it's bereavement, divorce, redundancy, takes between 18 months and 2 years to really process, and everyone may be at slightly different stages. And it's the children that I work with really, as well as the families, to make sure they're not traumatised by the experience, that they can bounce back and that they feel heard and understood. So that's why I wrote my Divorce Journal for Children, and that's why I specialise in help families around the world coping with this difficult time. You then add lockdown and COVID into this very difficult time, and you've got a very kind of difficult situation. So I thought I would focus on helping children on that.
Thank you ever so much, that's great. Jane, can I come to you? So everybody's chapter will have been different. Everybody's chapter will have come from different sort of sources and different thoughts. So what did you decide to write about in your chapter for the book, and who do you think it would appeal to, particularly your chapter?
Well, I chose a template for having a difficult dialogue, and I called it Taking the Heat About Out of Being Trapped Together, because I'm conscious that the families that I work with have really struggled with coronavirus because they're on top of each other, and anything that's going wrong goes wrong even worse. So it's a template to help them to have the conversation that they need over something that's not working. And so it's very much like a mediation process. It's a chance to actually set a deliberate intention to sit down and talk and spend the time that they need and clarify the issues, explore and develop what they think might be possible solutions so that they can come to an outcome that works for both of them, and the process helps them to do that. And the outcome will hopefully be something they can do. So it also incorporates how to make something work well for them. And I thought of that because I was working with a number of families at the time. And it's something that I incorporate in all my parenting partnerships that I create in the process of family mediation. Because I'm really conscious, well, like Sue, it's the children that end up suffering the most if they're not cared for. And unless the parents, during the course of the mediation, create a really good parenting partnership, then it's not good for the children. And they need to be able to continue having conversations for 18, maybe 25 years, maybe even 30 years with some of their kids. So it's about helping people to have a process and to treat it as sort of sacred and sit down and set the intention, have their water, be comfortable, be able to do it on their own. And we practice this in mediation so they've got it going forward. So it's mainly designed around suffering parents who are not getting it on, who are stuck in home and aren't necessarily separating or divorcing, but also for those who are separating and divorcing and those who have already separated. And because it's based on a classic mediation model, ultimately it can be used by pretty much anyone.
Thank you very much. Louisa, can I come to you with the same question? So what did you decide to write about for your chapter, and who did you have in mind particularly for thinking about it? Who do you think it would appeal to, the chapter that you wrote?
I think my thoughts were similar to Jane's in some respects. I was really conscious when we went into this strange period that a number of my mediation clients have taken the decision to separate, but they're still living in the same house. And that's a really hard situation, even when you can escape to work, you can decide to go and spend the weekend at friends or with family and just try and limit the time you spend together. But when we were suddenly put into this strange situation where you had to be at home the whole time, my first thought was for all those people who are managing a separation and, you know, have maybe managed it okay up until this moment by managing to be in different places as much as they can. Suddenly they are together 24/7 and potentially with children in the house as well. And I sort of echo the thoughts of Sue and Jane, really, that children so easily can become caught up in that situation. And I think most parents desperately want to minimise the conflict between the two of them because they understand that that affects their children. But when you've got nowhere to escape and nowhere to just take 5 minutes, it makes it a whole lot harder. So my chapter was very much aimed at people who are caught up in that situation, helping them to manage that and have a conversation about how do we carve out time on our own, what can we do if things really are going wrong quite badly. And just my heart went out to those people, really, because I just think it was such a really hard situation to find yourself in really unexpectedly.
Absolutely, and that chimes with a lot of what we're seeing on a day-to-day basis with in all of our practices, I'm sure. And finally, Alison, what was your chapter about, and who did you have in mind when you wrote your chapter?
So my chapter was really a series of top tips for people who are going through a separation, and I sort of thought that that was something that might be helpful because a lot of the clients that I spoke to during lockdown in particular had had time on their hands. A lot of them were not currently working and had to face the fact that the relationship was at an end, and actually now wanted to do something about it, but were finding it difficult to access resources to help them. And actually there's an awful lot available online, but it's hard to know what sources are reliable. So it's a series of top tips, first of all focusing on safety first, because unfortunately, as has been very well broadcast, the level of domestic abuse that there is normally has increased significantly during lockdown, which is no real surprise. Then secondly, how actually most people could actually get divorced themselves without needing to pay for professional help. In terms of the actual legal process, certainly in the UK, well, in England and Wales, that's possible. And so whilst this was a global book, I know that there are similar processes in other jurisdictions as well. So that was one of the other, and also how to find it, to make sure that you're not just signing up for a commercial online divorce and having to pay for something you shouldn't really need to pay for. Also some tips about how to get started with sorting out finances. So the things that you need to gather together information and so on, whether you're going into a mediation process, so this is people that I work with in mediation, or whether they're going through a court process or whatever, the basic level of financial information needs to be exchanged. So some tips about that. And perhaps most importantly, and to reflect what the others have said already, is how to look after your children during this time and to really focus on what's going to work for them going forward. Start working on a parenting plan and some tips about the resources that are available to help you to do that. So in terms of who I thought this might help, obviously couples who are going through a separation or thinking about going through a separation, but also wider family members who are often called in for help and to support. And it's actually quite hard to do that, I think. It's really hard as parents trying to help your children who are going through a divorce, if you have adult children in that situation, and friends as well. So, but yeah, primarily like the others, for people actually going through that experience at the time.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you, all of you. I mean, it is an amazing book, and as you say, one of the key themes is around supporting people with practical information and sort of practical ways of finding a way through this. So frameworks, different options for looking at how they actually solve the problems, and particularly keeping what the needs of the children are front and centre. Sounds like it comes out clearly from all of that all of you have said. So just a couple of other questions then for each of you. First of all, we'll look negative first. So one challenging aspect that you have seen, either from your thoughts when you were writing your chapter for the book or in your day-to-day practice, one particularly challenging aspect of the pandemic for families that you've seen. Sue, can I come to you first?
Yes, well, I mean, a lot of confusion in families sometimes, and lots of anger, and people are, if you're in lockdown, your emotions, they don't always know where to go. And sometimes, parents are challenging themselves with all the practical stuff about the finances and who's going to live where and where are they going to go to school. And then everything just stopped, where you're trying then to homeschool and you don't get on with your partner in the first place. That's why you've decided to separate. And suddenly now you've got to negotiate some sort of homeschooling. Looking after them, childcare, where you're trying to work, perhaps your partner is trying to work too. And also you've got to hold these very big emotions. The children are holding big emotions as well as you are. So I think one of the first places to start, I felt, was to help parents understand that reassuring their children is very important. What will stay the same? You can't give all sorts of guarantees, but I get parents to draw a circle, put some spokes in it, and write down some of the things that genuinely will stay the same. And that was reassuring for children in lockdown because there was so much uncertainty. Then you add the separation that's going to come, or is sort of was in that process of coming. So you can at least help ground them so that they feel there are senses of security. And then the whole point I felt was encouraging people to talk, but not shout. This whole point of listening to each other, certainly with the children and the parents, one at a time, and making sure that children felt that they were explained to, because a lot of the time children get the wrong end of the stick, because it depends on their ages and their stages, their personality, their temperament. And one of the important things is to make sure that you explain what's happening as far as you can see, age appropriate and stage and maturity appropriate, so that children can kind of see some sort of roadmap going forward. And of course, it's very important, certainly in lockdown as well, when it's all a bit tense, or we're certainly coming out of that, is not to be negative about the child's other parent. Now, that is not easy, but that is very, very important for the long-term well-being and mental health of your child going forward. Because I always say it's not the divorce that damages the children, it's the arguments and the rows between the parents that will live within them for a very long time.
Yes.
And to remember that you are the blueprint for love, how you handle conflict, and that the child is half of that person. You know, you say, oh, you're musical like your dad, or you're good at maths like your mum, or whatever it might be. So the child is trying to work out, who am I? And one key message I always feel is the child always blames themselves. If I didn't jump in your bed all of the night at 3 o'clock every morning, would you still be together? If I got better grades, would that have helped? If we weren't worried about this and that? But you have to reassure a child that they are not to blame for your divorce or separation, and that you will love them unconditionally, both of you rather, going forward, and that, you know, they will then adjust to that over time, just as the parents will adjust to that over time. So that's sort of the angle, but it was all a bit tricky when it was all in lockdown, because all of these big strong emotions, it's like shaking champagne or Coca-Cola or whatever you want to shake. Where are those bubbles going? Yes. And you've got to make sure that they were going somewhere safely and not going within you, because otherwise you get dis-ease.
Yes, thank you. That's really interesting. Jane, can I come to you? One challenging aspect of the pandemic for families. What have you seen that's the sort of particularly challenging thing that families have experienced in the pandemic?
Well, the one thing that I thought was particularly challenging is that it's something like what Sue just said, that suddenly my professional couple who work hard long days are back home, expected to work from home. The children are no longer dropped at nursery or school, and they're at home, and suddenly two parents are meant to be under each other's feet and those children at home, working full time and schooling the children school hours. So the pressure on all of them, and of course the depth of emotion that causes, is so great. And so what I've been doing in this period for a lot of the couples that I know have for past or future mediations, is that if they have just a short time with a mediator, it's like they're in a pressure cooker, and the mediation gives them a chance to let off steam. And all that overload is reduced, and all that emotional difficulty is dissipated, so that they can actually get back to coping what is a very, very busy household. So
absolutely.
That's the really negative side people have to get through. And on the positive thing about challenging aspects, I think the coronavirus has done a lot of this a great deal of good, in a sense, in that it's made families in particular slow down and stop and look at what they really value. And I'm finding families that I know are frenetic, going after this, that and everything, children do all sorts of different things, have to be at home and have to value spending time together and getting to the great outdoors. And of course that's huge for the environment and reducing pollution and everything. And I think people have hopefully reassessed what they value and what's important to them. And I hope that stays with us even when we have our vaccine at last.
Absolutely, thank you. So Louisa, what would you say would be, Jane's showing us the book. Show us the book again, Jane. There we go.
I pulled up the book while I spoke and I forgot.
Perfect.
Anybody wants to find it on Amazon.
We will put the details underneath the blog. Thank you. Louisa, coming to you then. Go do a negative and then perhaps a positive. I'll come back to you, Sue, for a positive. One negative aspect that you've seen that particularly arising in families arising out of the pandemic, if there's anything different you see?
I think it's finding space to deal with things more than anything. You know, with children suddenly being at home, many children haven't gone back to school, including my own. You know, it's that, okay, we've got an issue here. How do we solve it? Trying to carve out a space to have a conversation with each other about it without, you know, a child coming in needing help, struggling with maths. That's definitely been a nemesis in our house. And or that whole thing about, right, we need to do mediation, but our children are still in the house. We don't want them to overhear it. There's adult conversations going on. How can we access that help and have those conversations? I've been doing evening meetings for the first ever time in my career, just to try and help people with that situation, so that they can get, you know, younger children to bed, or set older children up in another room with Xbox film, whatever it is that will distract them enough that they're not going to come and interrupt mum and dad, just to try and give them that space. I think in terms of a positive, I think everyone has had to learn to be a bit kinder to themselves. You know, I know that this has come up certainly in meetings with other professionals, that everyone feels the need to present this kind of professional image that I'm always dealing with things. And actually many of us haven't felt like that during lockdown. We've had moments of, how can I manage all of this? And I think people have been a bit more accepting, and it's been a bit more, you know, it's okay to say, not going to get to that today, dealing with homeschooling, I'll come back to you tomorrow, all of those kind of things. So I think that being a bit kinder to ourselves, and not having so much of that negative talk around, you haven't done this, you haven't done that, I see that as a big positive.
Absolutely. And that, yes, that's really interesting. Alison, coming to you finally. So challenging aspects, but particularly challenging aspects of the pandemic for families, and then perhaps a more positive aspect you spotted?
I'd agree with everything that Sue and Jane and Louisa have already said about challenges. I guess underlying this whole pandemic situation is a very heightened level of anxiety and uncertainty, and that we've talked about some of the other strong emotions, but that's been there throughout, and that's really driven people's behaviour, particularly I think if they have they're vulnerable themselves, or if they have someone close to them who's vulnerable, or for the many families who've lost a loved one through the virus. That level of anxiety is massive, and it impacts on everybody, the children, everyone in the family. Also, I think financial pressure of the current situation, we're only just beginning to see the impact of that. And I'm afraid, well, we're dealing with the negative challenge at the moment. We've not even seen the beginning of that yet. When the furlough scheme comes to an end, I think we're going to see some quite extremely difficult situations.
Forgive me.
Someone wanting to get hold of you.
Carry on.
So the uncertainty, the anxiety, the financial pressure, and in terms of positives, I absolutely agree again with what has already been said about that. But I suppose another thought is that it's given us all a perspective on life that is different, and I hope that that's going to continue. It's nice seeing people in their home environments. We all have to, you know, we see the people as real people, whether it's our clients, whether it's colleagues, and that just makes the human connection bizarrely even more than in day-to-day life when you're in face-to-face contact. I think that's been really very interesting, and I hope that the positive aspects of that will be able to continue for the long term, actually.
I think it's broken down barriers between people as well, and particularly lawyers, this idea that you are real people that are listening and learning and hearing. And I would just say that some of the benefits that just jumped into my head was that families are eating together more, which is such a wonderful thing, and talking together and playing, and dads are around a lot more to do bedtime stories or whatever it might be. So there has been some wonderful positives that have come from it that I hope people will continue through. But I also agree with you, Alison, I don't think we've seen the tip of the iceberg of some of the difficulties. But you have to try and weigh that up in balance.
Yeah.
Ladies, thank you very much. That's been really helpful. Apologies for my interruption with my own phone. That's not very clever. Here's the book again. Jane's waving it for us. Thank you. We've got the other book as well that Sue's mentioned too, which is excellent, the Divorce Journal for Children. So again, the book's called Living Together, Separating, Divorcing, Surviving During a Pandemic. I understand that the authors who suggested this originally, they've done other projects, so there may be other projects of this type in the future. And the details of where you can buy the book will be underneath this blog. It's available on Amazon, but all the details will be there, as will the details of our speakers, so that you have their contact details as well. So I just want to say thank you very much to all of you, to Sue, to Jane, to Louisa, to Alison. Thanks ever so much for the conversation. And it certainly sounds like a really interesting book and lots of really helpful and practical support for people going through this difficult time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.